The last time I saw my father, I was 8 years old. And I think that my strongest memory of my father as a child was the piano. The piano that he had was a wedding present from Jeanette MacDonald to my parents, and on it there was this big photograph of Jeanette MacDonald that said, "To Lou, who made the widow marry." You know, we had this little routine. He would come home from the studio in the afternoons, and we'd go into his study, and we'd sit together. He would drink coffee and eat cookies, sometimes some awful ones that I had baked, really awful, on my little toy stove, and we would listen to quiz shows. I forgot what it was, Dr. Somebody, who was always doing awards in Mars bars and silver dollars. And then I'd go off and I'd get ready for bed, and later on I would come down and I would sit next to him on the piano, and he would tell me these wonderful stories. He would just make up pure fantasy, create a whole world, and all the parts had different voices. He would just make up the music as he went along. Sometimes he'd be telling me about what had happened at work, but instead of playing all the parts, which I hear that he did on the set, he would take the piano and he would create voices for them, and he would become just this marvelous spinner of tales. And it was just magic. It was totally a wonderland, a world of fantasy. And then also when I would go to bed, the last thing that I would hear at night would be him playing the piano. Music with a European flavor, kind of music that you would imagine spilling out of cafes onto wonderfully evocative streets, maybe right out of his movies, all those streets of his fantasy. And he had this amazing gift that he would go to an operetta, he would go to musical comedy, this I have from my mother, and he would come home and he would just sit down and play whatever he heard. He had an amazing ear. And I always thought that it meant that he couldn't read music, but in fact that, I'm told, is not true. He in fact had music lessons. And perhaps it's maybe just a touch of laziness, which I inherited, that you just don't want to read the music. If you have it in your ear, you just play it. And I always thought that music was really organic to him. It was kind of an extension of his soul. And something that it's always struck me when I watch his movies is how music is used, how very little music there is. It never hits you over the head. It never tells a story. It's always there as a jewel to kind of enhance the moment, sort of the contrary of how music is used today. We had at home a Cape art, which was, I guess, I can even remember, it was this huge armoire that stood at the far end in the hall. And on that, I guess my mother, it's hard to believe that she really could do it, but would record my father playing. And the house was always full of musicians. I think many of my father's closest friends, Hosea Turby, for instance, taught me to play the piano. Rubinstein, Horowitz, Franz Waxman, all those people were always there. There was lots of music. There were never kind of soirees or musicales, but as the evening progressed, people would play. Okay, my father wasn't shy. You know, there could be the greatest pianist in the world. Horowitz could be at dinner, and who would be playing the piano? At least to begin with, my father.